Of course I'm going to pay you for everything. We don't take money for such, said Sonny's voice belligerently. I want to pay, but do something more. Let me stay tonight. He took another step toward them. If only they could see him, they would know his sincerity, his real need. His voice went on. I'm not very strong yet. I'm not able to walk far. Even back to my car. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know exactly where I am. He stopped. He felt as if he might burst into tears. What would they think of him? Sonny came over and put his hands on him. Bowman felt them pass. They were professional too. Across his chest, over his hips. He could feel Sonny's eyes upon him in the dark. You ain't no revenuer come sneaking here, mister. Ain't got no gun? To this end of nowhere, and yet he had come. He had made a grave answer. No. You can stay. Sonny, said the woman, you'll have to borrow some fire. I'll go get it from Redmond's, said Sonny. What? Bowman strained to hear their words to each other. Our fire, it's out, and Sonny's got to borrow some, because it's dark and cold, she said. But matches, I have matches. We don't have no need for 'em, she said proudly. Sonny's going after his own fire. I'm going to Redmond's, said Sonny, with an air of importance, and he went out. After they had waited a while, Bowman looked out the window and saw a light moving over the hill. It was spread itself out like a little fan. It zigzagged along the field, darting and swift, not like Sonny at all. Soon enough, Sonny staggered in, holding a burning stick behind him and tongs, fire flowing in his wake, blazing light in the corners of the room. We'll make a fire now, the woman said, taking the brand. When that was done, she lit the lamp. It showed its dark and light. Whole room turned golden yellow, like some sort of flower, and the walls smelled of it and seemed to tremble with the quiet rushing of the fire and the waving of the burning lamp wick in its funnel of light. The woman moved among the iron pots. With the tongs, she dropped hot coals on top of the iron lids. They made a set of soft vibrations, like the sound of a bell far away. She looked up and over at Bowman, but he could not answer. He was trembling. Have a drink, mister? Sonny asked. He had brought in a chair from the other room and sat astride it with his folded arms across the back. Now we are all visible to one another, Bowman thought, and cried, Yes, sir, you bet, thanks. Come after me and do just what I do, said Sonny. It was another excursion into the dark. They went through the hall, out to the back of the house, past a shed and a hooded well. They came to a wilderness of thicket. Down on your knees, said Sonny. What? Sweat broke out on his forehead. He understood when Sonny began to crawl through a sort of tunnel that the bushes made over the ground. He followed, startled in spite of himself, when a twig or a thorn touched him gently without making a sound, clinging to him and finally letting him go. Sonny stopped crawling and crouched on his knees, began to dig with both of his hands into his dirt. Bowman shyly struck matches and made a light. In a few minutes, Sonny pulled up a jug. He poured out some of the whiskey into a bottle from his coat pocket and buried the jug again. You never know who's liable to knock at your door, he said, and laughed. Start back, he said, almost formally. Ain't no need for us to drink outdoors like hogs. At the table by the fire, sitting opposite each other in their chairs, Sonny and Bowman took drinks out of the bottle, passing it across. The dogs slept. One of them was having a dream. This is good, said Bowman. This is what I needed. It was just as though he was drinking the fire of the hearth. He makes it, said the woman with quiet pride. She was pushing the coals off the pots, and the smells of cornbread and coffee circled the room. She set everything on the table before the men. With a bone-handled knife stuck into one of the potatoes, splitting out its golden fiber. Then she stood for a minute looking at them, tall and full above them where they sat. She leaned a little toward them. You all can eat now, she said, and suddenly smiled. Bowman had just happened to be looking at her. He set his cup back on the table in unbelieving protest. A pain pressed at his eyes. He saw that she was not an old woman. She was young, still young. He could think of no number of years for her. She was the same age as Sonny, and she belonged to him. She stood with the deep, dark corner of the room behind her. The shifting yellow light scattered over her head, and her gray, formless dress trembling over her tall body when it bent over them in its sudden communication. She was young. Her teeth were shining and her eyes glowed. She turned and walked slowly and heavily out of the room, and he heard her sit down on the cot and then lie down. The pattern on the quilt moved. "She's going to have a baby," said Sonny, popping a bite into his mouth. Bowman could not speak. He was shocked, with knowing what was really in this house. A marriage, a fruitful marriage, that simple thing. Anyone could have done that, could have had that. Somehow he felt unable to be indignant or protest, although some sort of joke had certainly been played upon him. There was nothing remote or mysterious here, only something private. The only secret was the ancient communication between two people. But the memory of the woman's waiting silently by the cold hearth, of the man's stubborn journey a mile away to get fire, and how they finally brought out their food and drink and filled the room proudly with all they had to show, was suddenly too clear and too enormous with him for response. "You ain't as hungry as you look," said Sonny. The woman came out of the bedroom as soon as the man had finished, and ate her supper, while her husband stared peacefully into the fire. Then they put the dogs out, with the food that was left. "I think I'd better sleep here by the fire, on the floor," said Bowman. He felt that he had been cheated, and that he could afford now to be generous. Ill though he was not going to ask them for their bed. He was through with asking favors in this house, now that he understood what was there. "Sure, mister." But he had not known yet how slowly he understood. They had not meant to give him their bed. After a little interval they both rose, and looking at him gravely went into the other room. He lay stretched by the fire until it grew low and dying. He watched every tongue of blaze lick out and vanish. There will be special reduced prices on all footwear during the month of January, he found himself repeating quietly, and then he lay with his lips tight shut. How many noises the night had! He heard the stream running, the fire dying, and he was sure now that he heard his heart beating too, the sound it made under his ribs. He heard breathing, round and deep, of the man and his wife in the room across the passage, and that was all. But emotion swelled patiently within him, and he wished that the child were his. He must get back to where he had been before. He stood weakly before the red coals and put on his overcoat. It felt too heavy on his shoulders. As he started out, he looked and saw that the woman had never got through with cleaning the lamp. On some impulse, he put all the money from his billfold under its flute-glazed base, almost ostentatiously. Ashamed, shrugging a little, and then shivering, he took his bags and went out. The cold of the air seemed to lift him boldly. The cold of the air seemed to lift him bodily. The moon was in the sky. On the slope, he began to run. He could not help it. Just as he reached the road, where his car seemed to sit in the moonlight like a boat, his heart began to give off tremendous explosions like a rifle. Bang, bang, bang. He sank in fright onto the road, his bags falling above him. He felt as if all this had happened before. He covered his heart with both hands to keep anyone from hearing the noise it made. But nobody heard it.